There isn't an easy way for a fan to start to concisely introduce the Beatles, for a couple of reasons. Chief among them being everything there is to be said about them has been said about them countless times over, both positive and negative. Whether you're a fan or not, however, their influence and impact on music cannot be denied, producing some of the most renowned songs of all time, some of the most iconic albums, and pioneering general production quality in the music industry in general. Everything they accomplished was done in a really short space of time too, less than a decade. Their first album being released in 1963, and their last being recorded in 1969. Then, in 1970, following a couple of years of infighting, they broke up. Or did they? With any super famous band or group, there was always going to be some hope or prayer that they would get back together or reform, even for just one album. Rumours and speculation are always abound in these cases, whether it's Elvis not really being dead, or whether Pink Floyd's Waters and Gilmour would ever put aside their differences and perform together again. Something which has happened, albeit once for charity, and the second time during one of Waters' solo shows. While the Beatles never really reformed to this degree or level, they did occasionally, in isolation, work on each other's solo projects, George Harrison appearing on a couple of tracks on Lennon's Imagine album, for instance. But they never worked together all as one again. Sure, there were rumours, but just like the Paul is dead rumour, a potential subject matter for another video one day, they didn't hold much water, and the biggest and most widely believed one being that they reformed anonymously as the band Klaatu and released a couple of albums in the late 70s. However, Klaatu, the actual band, deny this. People speculate all the time about what the Beatles may sound like musically now if they were to reform, and if Lennon and Harrison were still with us. Obviously, the biggest key to this is listening to the direction they went in their respective solo albums, which doesn't bode well for Ringo, to be fair, but whatever. People have even gone to the lengths of creating mashups of their solo projects in an attempt to emulate what they might sound like, and it's one of these attempts that I'm talking about today. Everyday Chemistry, released in 2009, is a fairly bog-standard crack at mashing up an album of the Fab Four's solo works. However, this one carries an unusual twist. It's actually an unreleased Beatles album. Yes, you heard that right. And what's more, it's from another universe. I'll explain in the words of the person who discovered it. The following is an actual account of my experiences of recently. Because of the nature of what has happened, I must remain anonymous until I feel it is safe to reveal my name. But for now, you can refer to me as James Richards. On September 9th, 2009, I experienced something that I am still having trouble believing happened to me. I came into the possession of a cassette containing a Beatles album that was never released. In fact, not only was it never released, but it was recorded many years after they broke up. And no, I'm not talking about Klaatu. Now this is where the story becomes slightly more unbelievable, and it is almost embarrassing to attempt to explain the incident to you for fear of viewing me as completely absurd. I must assure you, I am not insane or on drugs. And hopefully, the audio from this tape will be enough proof that there is more than we think out there. I live in Livermore, California. But on September 9th, I was driving home from Turlock after visiting a friend for a few days. I had my dog with me, and I didn't have any plans for the day, so I decided to take a drive through a place called Del Puerto Canyon, just west of Turlock. There is a scenic road that is a fun drive and actually goes through to Livermore. I hadn't taken a cruise through it for a while, so I thought I would take this way home. It was about 2 p.m. A ways back into the canyon, my dog started acting like she needed to use the restroom, so I pulled over to the first available parking area to the side of the road and let her out while I stretched. At first I didn't notice, but then I heard the barking from 30 yards away. My dog was chasing a rabbit. Now, my dog is a pretty good dog, but if she is chasing something, then there is no stopping her. So the only thing I could do was become part of the chase. They already had about a 40-yard head start, so I had to really book it. The uneven ground and soft dirt patches made it difficult to run, and it wasn't very far into the chase I had stepped in a rabbit hole, fell, and knocked myself unconscious. When I woke up, I was in a room with some furniture and electronics in it. I was taken care of with a bandage on my head, but I still felt uneasy about the situation because where I fell and hit my head was in a very rural, unpopulated area with no houses, and outside the window of the room I was in, I could hear traffic. I wasn't near the window in the room. It was actually on the other side, next to an unusual-looking electronic machine that I didn't recognise from anywhere I've seen before. The only reason this stood out was because it seemed out of place in a person's home, which most of the room resembled. I decided to get up and look out the window, but the door opened and in ran my dog, who was pretty excited to see me. When I looked up, there was a man standing at the door. He was about 6 foot tall, had medium long black hair, and was dressed casually nice, but gave me a greasy vibe, if you know what I mean. He introduced himself as Jonas and asked me if I was okay, which I said yes. He said he found me unconscious in a field with my dog barking at me, so I thanked him for helping me and my dog out, and I was surprised my dog even came back to me. I then asked him the question that would make me start wondering if, in fact, I had gone crazy. I asked him, "Where am I?" "About 20 feet away from where I found you," he replied. I told him that couldn't be possible because there were no houses within at least 20 miles from where I last remember being. He then told me that what he was going to say next would be very shocking and unbelievable, and that if he didn't actually experience it himself, then he wouldn't believe it. He took a look at the machine near the window and looked back at me and said he transported me into parallel Earth. He said he travelled to our Earth dimension and found me knocked out in a blazing heat with nobody around to help me out. Normally, he said, he doesn't take outsiders through a portal, but in my case he thought I needed urgent help. I immediately started asking questions about travelling to parallel worlds, since all I knew about the topic was YouTube videos of Michio Kaku. He told me to slow down, and that he would explain himself. Apparently, in his world, a parallel travel machine can be purchased quite easily. While not cheap, it's pretty popular, even though the machine can be dangerous enough to cause death. In the 1950s of his dimension, the government was faced with the decision to continue to fund a space program, I'm guessing NASA, or a parallel dimension program called ARPD. I can't remember what he said it stood for. I'm pretty sure the PD is parallel dimensions, and I remember the acronym because I noticed it on a lot of electronics in the room I was in. He then explained that the real danger of using one of the machines was exploring new dimensions. Since there are an infinite amount of Earths in other dimensions, only a small amount have been explored. The problem with exploring unknown dimensions is the chance that you will die somehow once you walk through the portal doorway. He told me that people would die from falling, if the ground isn't close enough to where the portal opens, die from drowning. There are worlds covered in water, hard to reopen a portal underwater. Die from fire, atmospheric issues. He said, in order for people to avoid this, they would have to know that there would be similar ground in the dimension they were travelling to. So his government began to research worlds that were safe to transport to, even creating public spots where people could choose a menu of worlds to go to that were all safe. Many of these worlds were lush vegetation worlds that were never ruined by man, only to be invaded by the large, overcrowded population of the traveller's world. He said something about new industries that opened up because of this, one of them being something like dimensional life brokers. These people offered the chance to live as someone new in an already established similar world that doesn't know of dimensional travel, nor that people were crossing the dimensional border too. Jonas said that he was an explorer for one of the dimensional travel agencies and was looking into new, uncharted dimensions and came up my Earth. We talked about a lot of things. It was interesting to see what similarities and differences we had between worlds. Foods, culture, TV, technology. We covered a lot. We also started talking about music, which was an interesting topic because there are many of these same bands between our worlds that existed, including the Beatles. When their name got brought up, Jonas mentioned that his brother had just got back from seeing them perform at a concert recently, which I gave a weird look to and said, "You mean they are still together?" And he said, "Yeah." And then I told him about how they broke up in our world and that John and George passed away. Apparently, in his world, They are all alive, healthy, and on tour still. Jonas then had me follow him into another room that had a bookshelf-looking thing with some cassette tapes. Yes, the music ones. Apparently CDs never caught on in this world. And a tape player, radio, record player. I thought it didn't quite look like the type of radios we have. The speakers looked more like crinkled cardboard, but sounded pretty good. I didn't get too good of a look at the speakers, but they certainly weren't round. They almost looked like a tall accordion. The only Beatles album he had that was store-bought and had any real cover art was Sgt. Pepper's, which the cover looks slightly different than the one we have. But the songs were all the same. The other 6 Beatles tapes he had were all like somebody recorded them onto a blank cassette for him and wrote the song titles on a card slipped in the case. A couple of the album titles written on the tapes I recognised, but there were about 4 that I had never heard of before. He played a few songs from one of them, which was totally surreal to hear Beatles music that was never made, at least in our world. We talked about it a little bit. He said a girl made the tapes for him while he was in upper school, what they call high school. She was a huge fan of them and wanted him to listen to them. He popped out the first tape and was putting in the second one when I told him he should record me a copy of one so I could take it back with me, thinking it wouldn't be a big deal. Well, the look Jonas gave me when I said this is part of the reason I'm remaining anonymous. Not only did it sort of scare me, but it had a very serious, almost creepy look to it, followed by the phrase, not word for word, I can't remember exactly what he said, "No, you are not to take anything with you back to your world. No pictures, no souvenirs, no tapes, nothing." I asked him why, and he wouldn't really say except that, for my safety, I wasn't to take anything back. Of course, I am not the type of person to go through all of this parallel world stuff and not grab something to prove the outrageous story of my experience. So, for the moment, I told him I wouldn't take anything, and changed the subject. About an hour later, after some more talking, I heard a doorbell ring, and he left the room to check the door. I knew I may not have another chance to take something, so I grabbed one of the tapes and put it in my pocket, and then shuffled the tapes around to make it look less obvious that something was missing. When he came back inside, I said I was kind of hungry, just to get us out the room. I mixed the tapes up a little so it was hard to tell one was missing, but I didn't want to be there when he found out. So he then took me into the other room and fed me. For the most part, the food tasted like ours, but was different product names and colours. The purple ketchup was the strangest. We talked a little more, and then I expressed the notion that I should be going because it was getting late. The time of day was identical to ours, as is all worlds. We went back in the room with the machines with it. I grabbed my dog and shook Jonas's hand for taking care of me after I was knocked out. I thanked him again and stepped through the portal, which felt like getting wet but staying dry the entire time. Really weird. When I put my dog on the ground, she even shook herself like she thought she was wet. Back in our world, I could see my car on the road, and there was a straight line burn mark on the ground from where the portal had shown up, but it was dark outside, and the only reason I noticed the burn was because it was still smoking from the heat. I walked back to my car, didn't run this time, and drove home. The worst part was I couldn't even listen to the tape on the way home because I didn't have a tape player in my car. I wasn't actually even able to listen to it at home for the same reason. I had to go to Walmart and buy a tape player just to listen to it. Unfortunately, I don't have any information about the tape other than what is written on the card sleeve. The track names were written, as well as the album title, Everyday Chemistry. Everything else about it is as mysterious to you as it is to me. Also, it wasn't like I could have asked the guy anything about it, especially after taking it from him. I'll post some more about my experience in the coming days, but I have to go to work right now and this post is already long enough. If anyone has any questions about this incident, then I've set up an email address that you can contact me at thebeatlesneverbroakeup@yahoo.com. I'll try to answer everyone's questions as best as possible. Lastly, if there is anyone out there that has experienced anything like this, then please contact me. Some of the things this guy said to me almost make me wonder if this isn't the first time dimensional travellers have been here. James Richards. This was taken from the website thebeatlesneverbroakeup.com. and the website contains pictures of the alleged cassette, as well as the locale in which he apparently got himself knocked out and entered this parallel world. Is this at all possible? Well, if you take into account the many worlds interpretation of quantum theory, mathematical hypothesis, and other things that fascinate me but I don't have the brain capacity to fully understand, then yes. If anything is possible, so is this story. It's also possible that Ringo Starr invented pot noodles. Do I believe it? Nah, it's just a very well put together mix-up stroke mash-up of post-Beatles songs, isn't it? Apart from the obvious fact that the tracks are what they are. Something which James addressed himself on the FAQ page of the website, which oddly is no longer on the site. While his answer is feasible, remember, literally anything is. But quantum theory is just that, a theory. It's almost unprovable in almost any respect. A situation that can have any possible outcome also has every possible outcome. Try proving everything, ever. There are a couple of more interesting points to be made. Firstly, the date this all occurred on, the 9th of September 2009. This also happened to be the date of the release of the first considerable dusting down or remastering of the Beatles' entire back catalogue. Prior to this, all the Beatles albums and compilations that were available on CD were simply the old analogue masters which had been digitised in the late 80s when CDs were becoming popular. It's entirely possible that the sudden renewed interest in the band in 2009 had inspired James to create this mashup, and the story was invented as a way of promoting it. One other minor flaw in the story, and this is only something that occurs to me, and it may be wrong, and I can concede some caveats on this, but if the MP3s available on the website were taken from the only available source of the album, a slightly battered-looking cassette from a parallel dimension, then surely the process of digitising this to a digital format would leave some artefacting, some hiss, some wobble, some telltale indicator. And as far as I can tell, there is none. Unless this guy has some super expensive equipment, as well as a lot of time on his hands to clean up the remaining imperfections, then I do have to conclude that this is a very well done and actually quite enjoyable mashup collection. But what do you think? Here are a couple of tiny, very tiny as not to catch the ire of the copyright gods, excerpts. But what do you think? Is this a real Beatles album from a parallel dimension where they never broke up, cassettes were still a thing, and the Star Wars prequels weren't a fucking crushing disappointment? Or is it a fan project with an unusual Reddit story attached to it? Let me know in the comments. I'll leave a link to the website in the description and you can have a listen to it yourself. I personally really enjoy the mixes and have in fact been listening to it while I write the script for this very video. And in fact I have the album downloaded to my phone, meaning I listen to tracks from it when I'm out and about. Thanks for watching everyone, leave a like if indeed you do, share the video around on your various social media, it really helps the channel, subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of any future videos and live streams. Don't forget to follow me over on Twitch, that's twitch.tv/MankPete. I stream video games a couple of times a week over on there. If you're really cool, you'll support me on Patreon too, where you get access to exclusive work-in-progress versions of these videos, as well as access to the final video for up to 1 day before release. I'd like to thank my current patrons, Crunchy Karma, Blue Flip-Flops, Urbana Fox and Mess the Moose. Cheers guys, you be awesome and that. Once again, thank you for watching everyone. Peace out, peace off, and I'll catch you in the next video.
You're the only